Hola, muy buenos días a todos y a todas.
Good morning, everybody.
Vamos a dar comienzo
We're
a
gonna
esta
start this session that I think fascinating out of the debates about this commemoration of the 50 years of the end of
en España, en Portugal.
nefarious dictatorship in Spain, Portugal, and Greece. I think that
A la hora de
uh,
dictaduras, porque no es un concepto neutro
we
y
should
porque
use
disminuyendo la carga criminal
qualification when we talk about dictatorship because they are decreasing the authoritarian and horrible legacy. We should use qualifications because we are witnessing a historical deformation. In today's session, we're going to talk about paths towards democracy, protests, resistance, and repression. We have an excellent panel with Primeros Boglis first, professor of social history at the Faculty of History and Archaeology at the Tessali University. We talked to Julia Acornero. After Polimeros, she's professor of political science of the Cervantes Institute in Lisbon, and finally with Irene Martin, political science professor at the Autónoma University of Madrid. I'm Marga Ferrem, Spanish. I'm the president of Transform Europe, which is a network of political foundations and critical thinking centers where Rosa Luxemburg is also included, of 23 European countries. There is also ASCII and 38 other foundations of Europe. I'm here on behalf of Transform Europe. I would like to intervene about Spain in my country, the country where you are. I know that most of you know, but it's good to remind it. Aranguren said that repetition is part of the pedagogy. Although an idea has been already said, it's good to repeat it until it becomes a social consensus, because part of my hypothesis is that the consensus created around Franco dictatorship is breaking apart. There is the intention of breaking it. In Spain, like you say, it's been published a survey that triggered all the alarms. A study by Fort 40B, a polling firm, said that more than half of the Spanish young males said that they would accept better than the idea of a dictatorship better than former generations' mind of elderly ones that lived through a transition. But the fact that there are so many young males open to the idea of an authoritarian government, this trigger alarms. So this commemoration of this 50th anniversary of the fall of this nefarious dictatorship is so timely because, as Daniela Greeley said, I like it a lot, you are those who don't understand the past, not those who don't remember it, are doomed to repeat it. We have to say, so what fascist dictatorship were the blood, the repression, the fear, what that meant in order to give content to a horrific period of our history. We start to listen to hear in Spain and other countries that Francoism wasn't that bad. The younger people say that, well, it wasn't so hard, Franco. You start to listen to this narcotic whisper that don't deny the criminal past of dictatorship, but rather minimize it. There are Argentinians here. When Milei says that instead of 30,000 dead, it was 8,000, it doesn't deny, it minimizes in order to turn it into something more acceptable and less remindable. In Spain, it's not just about Viva Franco and the Roman salute, but a mitigation of the importance of the dictatorship. Spain is not just Greece and Portugal. In Spain, there was no revolution like in Portugal, like the Carnation Revolution, or in Greece, were an internal revolt into the military junta, created a regime crisis. In Spain, Franco died in bed, covered by a carpet of silence about the crimes during the 40 years of dictatorship. My hypothesis here is that I believe that when the far right minimizes the hardship of dictatorships, I was thinking that it was about the adulteration, the sweetening of their own past, since they are the inheritors, they are the heirs of those dictatorships. But I don't think so anymore, that it goes beyond that. The intention behind the minimization of the harm of dictatorship has to do with the fact that if a dictatorship wasn't that bad, it is more socially acceptable of the idea of an authoritarian government. And I think this has to do with our present and our future. I don't know whether I make myself clear. What we see, what we witness in Spain and other parts of Europe is this. So before passing the floor to the panelists, I would like to remember what happened in Spain with data. Data are known, but it's good to remember it, like Aranguren said, once and again until they imprint on our memory. Between 115 and 150,000 missing people, 30,000 missing children, thousands of common graves at the Valle de los Caídos, for instance, 500,000 exiles, 300,000 political prisoners. Spain is the second country in the world with more missing people. Those are research data of Baltasar Garzón's research and Javier Rodrigo data. In Spain, there were 188 concentration camps. Julian Casanova says that 50,000 Reds were killed between 39 and 46. Those are so horrific data that it's hard to find them in other places besides the Second World War. These are the foundations of what Francoism meant, a regime of fear, of repression, of torture and killing. These are the names that should accompany every time we quote or mention Francoism. So we have to evoke a memory, but not a neutral memory, but rather one that points out, that says that this is an open wound, the wound of unjudged, killed people, a regime that wasn't judged. In Spain, Julián Grimau is still guilty. In Spain, is still the building of the police, the chief of police, has a plague of historical memory. With to the youth, we have to say that we want to build a future where fascism doesn't come back, does never come back. So we're going to start with the floor to Polimeris Boglis, a professor of history and a member of ASCII. He's going to speak about something fascinating, the emotional policy of during the revolt of the Polytechnic. He's going to speak in English if you need a translation. The floor is yours.
Buenos días. I would like to thank you for the participation in this conference, and especially would like to thank Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Athens and Madrid for this, for their hospitality. What I'm going to talk today is about the Polytechnic School uprising. For those who don't know what happened, it's about a 3-day occupation of the Polytechnic School in Athens between 15th and 17th November, an occupation that started as a student occupation, then ended up in an uprising against the dictatorship, which was crushed by the military on the 17th November 1973 and caused the death of 25 civilians and the injury of about 2,000 people. I'm not going to talk about what happened these 3 days. There are many other studies, especially Kostis Kornet's path-breaking book about the students and the subjectivity and the participation in the uprising. What I would like to talk about today is something different. It has to do about the relation between a historical event, which is the Polytechnic School uprising, and the affect, the afectivo, as I was told that it's called in Spanish. My entry point would be the question of graffitis. So I will start from discussing the political graffitis during the occupation. Then I will turn towards the end of my paper to discuss about the political affect. The political graffitis were drawn or written during the occupation were erased immediately after the uprising was suppressed by the military, but have been preserved in photographs taken by photojournalists who covered the Polytechnic School uprising. So my PowerPoint presentation is contains some of these photographs, and these are taken by photographs by 2 albums published in the months following the downfall of the dictatorship in July 1974. An introductory comment about the term, what does it mean, political graffiti? By the term political graffiti, I mean all written performances and expressions of political discourse, mainly with paint, spray paint, and markers that were drawn on very different surfaces and materials. They were drawn on walls, cardboards, blackboards, but also on very completely unusual surfaces like trolley buses and buses, as you will see. I will use the term political graffiti rather than political slogans because, as we shall see, many of the written expressions are not verbal, but also visual compositions. In fact, they are visual texts. Political graffiti has been the subject of research by many historians, sociologists, and anthropologists who have highlighted a number of issues that are interesting to us. The first issue is that graffiti is a practice of urban space, not in the sense that it simply appears in cities, but that it defines space, in the sense argued by Tim Creswell, namely that graffiti is the tactic used by subalterns to claim and define the space they control. In the case of Polytechnic School, graffiti showed the visible limits of the uprising's expansion. The second issue is that graffiti gives us the opportunity to study the discourse of subalterns in public space, the political discourse, so to speak, from below. Graffiti is politics of the street, and at the same time, politics on the street. As Virgile Sirefis and Grégoire Lecoing have argued in an article in 2022, the graffiti is a form of political discourse at the same time as a political performance, individual or collective, spontaneous or well-organized. Graffiti contradicts the dominant discourse in public. The third issue is that political graffiti is situated within the realm of affective politics. At this point, I would like to clarify something. I will address the question of affect towards the end of my paper, but right now I would like to clarify something. I'm not claiming that emotions are inherent in political discourse or that graffiti itself provokes emotions. My starting point for discussing affective politics will be what Sarah Ahmed calls the sociality of emotions. Emotions are the points of interface between the inner and the outer world, between the I and the we, and are formed as a result of their circulation between people and bodies, or, to return to the case of Polytechnic School, between and within the crowd of the young protesters. From the very first day of the occupation of the Polytechnic School, the students inside began writing slogans and graffiti on the walls of the institution's buildings. It is impossible to determine exactly when its graffiti was done. But we know that on the second day of the occupation, that is Thursday, November 15th, the buildings, classrooms, corridors, walls inside the Polytechnic were already full of graffiti, while the well-known slogans, US out and NATO out, had already been written on the gate of the Polytechnic School on the Patission Avenue, which is one of the main avenues of Athens. Now, I hope it works. It works? No, it doesn't work. It will work, okay. On the Senate building, the slogan, no to the junta, has been formed with pieces of paper stuck next to each other, while hundreds of anti-dictatorial slogans can be found both inside and inside the buildings, but also on the outer perimeter of the Polytechnic School. Oops, no. Yeah. This is one side of the building with covered with many slogans. The abundance of slogans and graffiti inside the Polytechnic transformed the higher education space into a place of political mobilization. Thereby, students, through the graffiti, appropriated the space from the institutional administration, turning it into something that was until then prohibited and suppressed, a site for political activism against the dictatorship. At the same time, it was an uprising that sought to transcend the specific space of the Polytechnic and the relative security that in theory university asylum provided. Right there, at the edge of the fence and the asylum, on the Polytechnic School railings, there was a loads of slogans and graffiti on cardboard and cloth. Most of them are on the railings of Patission Avenue. This is the Patission Avenue. The street that you see is Patission Avenue. The reason is obvious. Patission Avenue is and was then one of the main avenues in Athens. It has much more vehicle and pedestrian traffic than the other three streets surrounding the building. In general, the Polytechnic School was in the center of Athens, close to one of the two main squares in downtown Athens, close to bus and trolleybus bus stops and stations, to preparatory schools for entering the university, where hundreds of high school students flocked every afternoon. Along with the claim to space comes the claim to visibility. Banners and placards were put high on the railings or on top of the gate, had large letters so that they could be read from a distance and be as original or unusual as possible in order to attract the attention and the gaze of a passerby. Outside the fence railing was the area of risk, in the sense that there was no asylum and the arrest by police was possible. As long as there was a large crowd on the street, the risk of arrest was reduced, which is why slogans, loudspeakers, and leaflets were used to turn the area of the uprising into a magnet for people. Graffiti defines the area of the uprising in the urban landscape. As the crowd grows, the rebels claim more space in the city by writing slogans. In the case of the Polytechnic, graffiti on walls as relatively permanent marks of claiming space remain on the perimeter of the building and the streets surrounding it. At the same time, however, graffiti and slogans circulate throughout the city. The crowd at the demonstrations in central Athens, the young people who participate, carry banners and placards that carry the message of the protest beyond the Polytechnic School. They write slogans on trolley buses, like this one, where the students write "Down with the junta," which carry the slogan to other neighborhoods of Athens. Others make improvised placards and circulate among the crowd that has flooded the pavement on Patission Avenue. There's one student or someone, a young man, carrying a placard saying, worker, you are starving, why you obey them? I think the concept of circulation is very crucial, so I think we should have it in mind. The slogans and graffiti are extremely varied, reflecting the diverse crowd participating in the uprising. If I had to describe their characteristics, I would say that there are four. The first is that there are no signatures from political parties or organizations, and in general, there is no reference to specific political parties. It's the anonymity of the crowd that prevails. The second is that they express very different political views and perceptions of politics. Some graffiti were simply against the dictatorships, while others were more radical or even revolutionary. The third is that in many cases, they are product of spontaneous action and individual expression. They have spelling mistakes or other mistakes have been done hastily. Some were written on top of other graffitis, etc. The fourth and final characteristic is that they reflect the political atmosphere that was shaped and influenced by international developments. This is written on a bus, and it says the first word is Chile, a kind of reference to the Chile, to the killing of Allende in September 1973. So this idea of connecting the struggle against the dictatorship in Greece with the struggle against the dictatorship in Chile. Also, as we shall see in other graphics, there's frequently the reference to the name of Allende. Or Thailand, which is very, because in Thailand, in October 1973, there were student protests in Bangkok, the capital of Thailand, against the military regime in Thailand, or the international peace symbol. The variety of graffiti and their non-standardized character show the spontaneity of those who picked up a marker or a spray to write or draw something. Graffiti is addressed to others, like fellow students, passers-by, the police, but it is also a means of personal expression. The need and freedom to publicly express ideas, desires, and feelings in a context of a long-standing oppression and fear. Through this specific act and practice, writing a graffiti, they perceive and act as resistance subjects who define the prohibitions, censorship, and self-censorship imposed by the junta. Slogans and graffiti during the Polytechnic School uprising had obviously a very specific political orientation and a very clear political message against the dictatorship. However, as I said, these slogans and graffiti were not politically uniform. In an article on graffiti in Greece during the years of the recent economic crisis, anthropologist Yannis Zaimakis argued that graffiti can be divided into three categories: protest, revolt, and conflict. This is a useful categorization, and I will start with the last category, conflict. By conflict, Zaimakis means that the clash of opposing ideas, as reflected in graffiti, that the graffiti create a space, a quote, of dialogical communication on urban surfaces among writers with different political views. This dimension also exists in the graffiti of the Polytechnic School. It is well known that students who were members of left-wing youth and student organizations during the occupation viewed from the very beginning with very great concern or even hostility the extreme slogans by anarchists and gauchists. In many cases, they came into conflict as one side wrote graffiti and the other erased them during these 3 days of occupation. And I think, no, that was about Allende before, as I was told you. And there you see that on top there's a slogan, the standard slogan, bread, education, freedom. And then under that was the proletariat on the street. And the proletariat has been whitewashed because it was considered the word proletariat as very powerful or very radical, and they raised the word proletariat on the street. And also you can see this kind of dialogue or conflict of views in many different cases during the occupation on the walls, this conflict on the walls. A large number of graffiti and slogans adopt the logic of the call for a general revolt against the regime. Slogans such as people strike, people fight, people's power, aim to incite, mobilize, encourage, in short to empower the crowds that are gathered in the streets around the Polytechnic School and to spread the spirit of struggle. These graffiti were addressed primarily to the thousands of people who went to the Polytechnic School to support student struggle out of curiosity, passers-by, students' families, and friends. In this graffiti, the people are transformed from those subjected to the sovereign power into subjects who struggle. Or in other words, they become subjects, we, the people, when they resist and claim power. This graffiti sought to create bonds of solidarity among the protesters themselves, but also between the protesters and the crowds of citizens to create a new collective subject, we the people. Most graffiti were protest slogans calling on the people to overthrow the dictatorship. The message was direct and immediate. The slogan, down with the junta, prevailed among the graffiti. However, the regime is also undermined in different ways, many other ways. One is the invocation of historical memory, which delegitimizes the regime by identifying with the darkest aspects or darkest periods of history, which are condemned in the conscience of society, like fascism and Nazism. A very common way to write the word junta was to create a swastika instead of X in the beginning. It's very common in the graffitis to have the word junta with swastika, like to, obviously to connect the dictatorship with fascism and Nazism in particular. Another, which I find more interesting, is the ridicule of the regime. One of the cardboards in the railings of near the gate is a very weird one. It reads, Pee-pee, puppet, self-indulgent loafers out. The English doesn't work very well, but I try to, translate it. The head of a man who looks like Satan and clearly refer to the Prime Minister Spyros Markezinis, who was considered a puppet of the dictator Georgios Papadopoulos. So you have the head of Markezinis, and they call him Pipi, which is like a nickname, and also puppet, which is a puppet of the regime. And the graffiti brings to mind the subversiveness of carnival, as famously analyzed by Mikhail Bakhtin. Through laughter, sarcasm, and irony, the dominant power and organization of the world were challenged. The real world turned upside down, and mockery functions as a desecration or profanation, if you like, of power. Like in this one also, This is a trolley bus, and they write on it, the placard says, "Take the monkey and leave." The monkey is the prime minister, who was very ugly in the face, so that's why they call him a monkey. Take the money and leave the country. The goal of this carnivalesque mockery was to counter the feeling of fear that had been instilled in Greek society after 6 years of dictatorship, but also to overcome a much more specific fear in those days, the violent suppression of the uprising by the police or even the military. The regime, through slogans and graffiti, becomes an object of ridicule and anger as long as the uprising continued and spread in the center of Athens. But let's not focus our attention only on slogans and graffiti. Along with these, let us pay attention to the people on the street. Those people holding placards, those who crowded the railings on Patission Avenue, those stopping the trolley buses to write a graffiti, those holding banners and the Greek flag while demonstrating. And you see, there's a demonstration this day I think it was Friday, November 16th, a few hours before the violent crackdown. and the banner behind is read. It's from Matthew, right? From the Bible. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Like you are condemned, and look at the face and the tension that they have while they shout the slogans, and they take to the streets together, shout slogans, raise their hands and fists. The graffiti and slogans written and shouted by the crowd, whether outside the Polytechnic School or demonstrating in the surrounding streets, create, express, and spread an affective atmosphere. Ben Anderson describes affective atmosphere as, I quote, a class of experience that occur before and alongside the formation of subjectivity across human and non-human materialities and in between subject-object distinctions. More to the point, as the huge crowd gathered, moved, walked, protested, wrote graffiti, shouted slogans, clashed with the police, affect was created, transmitted, and circulated among those who took part in the November uprising. I suggest that the dominant affect among this crowd of thousands of people was that of excitement. What is excitement? Daniel Tartakovsky, one of the most interesting scholars of demonstrations, has rightly pointed out that demonstrations are not directed only at the authorities or society, but at the demonstrators themselves, strengthening their shared identity and belief in the cause. Protests are moments of collective enthusiasm that reinforce individuals' commitment and the unity of the crowd. The feeling of participating in something they consider very important creates a state of collective excitement. This is a photograph in front of the Polytechnic School. It is the physical participation in the collective subject that is created during those days and proclaims "we the people." Let me underline the significance of bodily experience. Brian Masumi, in his brilliant exploration of affect, he argues that affect is a situation rooted in, I quote, body's ability to affect and be affected, is a fluid state of becoming and not being yet. In the case of Polytechnic School uprising, affect is the experience of a bodily experience that includes sight, hearing, smell, and touch. Graffiti cannot be separated from the music and the slogans from the loudspeakers, the smell from the tear gas and burnt tires, the sound of bullets, the sight of barricades, the screams of people, the sight of angry policemen beating protesters, the sound of armored vehicles and military tanks. The excitement is generated because the sense of belonging in the collective subject is not just a verbal expression. This sense was created there and then and has a physical and experiential dimension. It is a sensory event for the protesters. It is a placard that he or she holds with her or her own hands on the railings of Polytechnic School and shouts slogans. The excitement of participating in something that was still in progress has not become something yet, and no one knew how it would end until the bloody crackdown by the military in the early hours of on Saturday, November 17th. Final excitement is interpersonal and relational, is created by the interaction among the participants, and it is contagious as it spreads to more and more people. Conclusion. It's not a conclusion, but anyway. For many decades, historians were very skeptical about emotions, mainly because they were associated with earlier studies on crowd psychology and the supposedly irrational nature of emotions. Yet, now we know very well that collective action is not only the result of organizational structures, political opportunities, or framing processes. And now we can ask ourselves, why at some point in the past people felt political? What does it mean to feel political? The so-called affective turn allows us to re-examine the collective experience of people who in different historical contexts mobilized, protested, demanded, and revolted. Affect is not something that is inherent in the subjects or caused by an object, for instance a graffiti, but something that's created by the circulation and interaction between people, bodies, and objects. Graffiti is part and parcel of a variety of stimuli that created an affective atmosphere or affective situation, such as it was the excitement in the case of November 73 events. I would like to finish my paper by reading you a passage. I quote, "The commotion, the rushing and pushing aside, the fluidity of the movement, the crowd swaying in the streets as if dancing to the rhythm of angry music that came from within, the equalizing character and incredible power that allowed it to overcome all fear and regroup even when police fire led bodies on the street." This passage that so beautifully captures this feeling of excitement in the crowd of protesters does not concern the Polytechnic School, but could very well describe it. This is how Enzo Traverso narrates the Vienna Uprising of 1927, based on the testimony of Elias Canetti. I think that it's time now, as historians, to address this issue, the rhythm of angry music that came from within. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Has been absolutely great to know more, particularly with the pictures, to go there and know with you, know, with those people in the Polytechnical uprising.
After listening to this, we're going to follow the thread, hearing about she has focused her works on these social movements, activism, and repression, and she's going to talk about the activist trajectories inside and beyond the revolutions.
Do you think I can stand there so that I can look at... So I also feel more comfortable talking, standing. So thank you, first of all, thank you very much for this very nice invitation, and I'm very happy to be here and just coming from Lisbon today. And thank you very much for the organization and for this very nice event. we are almost at the end of these celebrations now. Is in almost December of 2025. So we had a long year of celebration in Portugal during the 2024. Yeah, a long year, a very intense of celebration. Oh no, I'm not saying this like we are happy that the celebrations are finishing, but I think that they have been very intense, and I think that also was a really a great opportunity to come back to reflect on this period in Southern Europe with new lenses, bridging also what the studies and the knowledge that was created immediately after the democratization process, and what now we know after many years of studies and researches and new generations, those are new revolutions around the world, like the Arab Spring or other things happening. So I think that this is it has been very important also to have this new reflection of current processes of a revolution. Do I have to? Yeah. Okay. So I just need to. She's this one, no? Okay. So I'm also very happy to present now after your intervention, because I think there are many common points, even if my perspective is a little bit different. I come from political sociology with a look also at urban processes, questions like the right to the city, and how social movements also happen and to strengthen this my echo? Okay, I'm sorry. Usually I need to speak louder, and now I need to try to be quiet. Okay, slower. Okay. He's my manager, sorry. So as also if I look to this role of social movements and activism in strengthening the right to the city, in and beyond revolutionary moments. So I start with these excerpts from an interview which I titled "The Power Falls into the Street." This is a very famous sentence attributed to Marcello Caetano. The last day of the Estado Novo dictatorship is also the title of a book of our friend and colleague Diego Ceresale, who will be here today, I think, later. It's a very good book about these processes in Portugal. So this is Thursday on the down on 25th of April. I happened to be at home of a great childhood friend of mine, and by chance we turned the radio, and around 4 o'clock in the morning, we almost didn't believe what we were hearing. The first broadcast of by the armed forces movement. At the beginning, we had doubts about the authors of the message. Slowly, our doubt dissolved. We followed the announcement, etc., and the dictatorship was being taken down. And later the day, I personally watched close to the Carmo. Carmo is the square where Marcello Caetano was trying to find refuge at the quarter of the National Republican Guard. And I watched close to the Carmo headquarters. In the midst of the large unit of people, the rendition of Marcello Caetano, and rejoiced, and this element of emotions against comeback. And this is for me very interesting because there are many important elements in this excerpt. Of course, the element of the of the emotions and the affectiveness of these processes, but also the element of the space. So the space where the things were, this process was taking place, and the element of trajectories. So these are activists, long-term activists that I interviewed about their trajectories before, during, and after the revolution. So these three elements are at the focus of what I like to present today. So political processes and also social processes like regime change are also much place-based, as all the social and human experience it. And we sometimes forget that, but the spaces and places, which are two different things, I still don't understand very well how different, but in literature they are different, even if very well interconnected. But they play a very important role in allowing or preventing political process like mobilization, activism, and also the result of these processes. During the day, the first day of the revolution, on the 25th of April in the morning, the armed forces movement, asked the citizens, the Portuguese citizens, to stay home, to not go to the street, to stay quiet. But of course, the people didn't listen to this order and went to the street. And not just the activists. Well, actually, many activists, they stayed home because they didn't know until the end of the day which was the color of the coup d'état. So many of them, they say we didn't go to the street until when we didn't have things clear of what was happening. But many citizens, they just went to the street and they just occupied the street, the squares, and they completely rejected this order. And this refusal to stay home actually transformed the day in a revolution and transformed Lisbon in a revolutionary city. Much inspiration for this work that I'm developing come from this recent book by Mark Beisinger, The Revolutionary City, which interconnected this dynamic of trajectory of mobilizations and revolutions and the urban space and places. In the following days, we have huge demonstrations in the streets of Lisbon, occupations of different buildings. We have also another process is very interesting. The citizens that friends and comrades and families that were going in front of the prisons to ask for the release of the political prisoners. In front of the stations at the airport, to welcoming the political exiles that were coming back to the city. So these places and the place-based dynamics that make really this effervescence very present in the life of the city, in the public life of the city. On the 2nd of May, there is an event that is very important. Until now, is the occupation by many families of poor families that occupy these buildings. They squatted these empty municipal buildings under construction in a peripheral neighborhood of Lisbon. And soon after, the revolutionary process diffused to Porto and other cities with many differences that I don't have time to explain. Maybe we have other presentations in these days about the Portuguese Revolution, and for sure there will be more on that. So now just a step back, why I think that this perspective of life trajectories is important and what we mean with life trajectories. Life trajectories of people were deeply affected by the dictatorship. That's obvious, not just by the ones of activists, but also the ones of any citizen, because of many things, because of censorship, because the political police that was present in the daily life of everybody in a very, very deep way and hidden way. Many civil collaborators also. A dramatic restriction of cultural and social activities and contents, of course. Corporative urban planning, so the very shape of the cities were reflecting the ideals of the Estado Novo, like the way the neighborhoods were built. So they were really reflecting the idea of society that was at the roots of Estado Novo, like with based on the unity of the family. And so I don't have time to develop this topic, but it was really reflecting how the cities were planned and built. And of course, preventing every active repression. So repression means that also included a drastic control of places, and after the closure of the places, like we were seeing in the previous presentation, the role of students in the streets. And many times the university campuses in Lisbon and Porto and Coimbra were closed, particularly since the early 70s. Really, the police entered the campuses and forbidden the entrance to students. But actually, it's obvious that these tactics, instead of demobilizing people, simply displaced activism, because it's obvious that at that point of mobilization it was very difficult, and people and students highly mobilized, and other activists were just coming back. So they simply moved to other places. And these also, these places can be, in certain cases, if the repression was really serious and really threatening the life and the survival of the activists, activists could decide to go to exile or in clandestinity. But in many situations, mobilization simply moved from the campuses to other parts of the city. And this also is apart from guaranteeing the survival of and the continuity of the mobilization and the activist trajectories across time and space, contributed to some shifting of the engagement from a sector to another, even social sectors, to a reconfiguration of political identities, creation of new political identities, simply because of the closure of the spaces, because two places were closed, because two places were closed. So this contributed to diffusion of mobilization, to politicization, etc., etc. And this process is very important, because if we think when we think at the end of the regimes, in a long-term regime like the Portuguese one, 50 years, considering also the military dictatorship, we need to think that citizens, people, they don't have any democratic practice. So we have generations of people that are never participating in elections, in any kind of democratic or form of horizontal form of participation, like assemblies or meetings. All these things are forbidden. Just very few sectors continue to use these democratic practices. Sometimes oppositions groups, the students' milieu, etc., etc. So we have democracy, something that is not invented. We need learning, we need practices, we need to know how to deal a meeting, how to deal with assembly, how to participate in election. Now we think is common, is normal, because we have elections so at any level of our life. In our building, I don't know if in Spain this exists, but in Portugal you have you elect the administrative body of the building inside the building, so you have elections at any we forget that, but any elections, assemblies with their specific status, rules, etc., etc. And in this context, this doesn't exist. So imagine after the regimes fall down. It's not simple that democracy is implemented and everybody knows how it works. So this previous learning in specific sectors, as like kind of this democratic training, for instance, in the oppositions groups, is very important to consolidate this training and to transmit it to other sectors of society. And this is also what happened in the context of the Portuguese Revolution. So looking at the trajectories, and the trajectories help to understand how these practices are diffused, learned, and how they pass through one sector to another one. And so I think it's a very interesting entrance point for understanding this dynamic, and also trajectories help to understand the interaction and intersection between different levels of observation, the micro level of the activists, the meso level of the networks and groups, and the macro level of the big processes of regime change and other political big processes, and the interaction among all these levels, which is something very important, I think. So I come back a moment. So revolution theory, like I am talking about people like Jeff Godwin, or even Charles Steele in a certain way, Goldstone, etc., rarely have looked at this level of analysis. While on the other side, people working on democratic transition, on social movements and democratic transition from a more historical perspective, also have rarely looked at this level of analysis of the trajectories, except some very noteworthy exceptions that we have here, like famous historian Kostis Kornetis, who look at that, even if an approach a little bit different, not really using the analytical tool of activity trajectory, that is a special tool in social movement studies, more through a biographical approach in many studies, as is very recent book. And another previous book that was already mentioned, but also Nikos Papadoiannis, sorry for my pronunciation, also worked on this question. And very recent works on the Arab Spring also are focusing on this aspect, and with a very, very interesting results that are just appearing now. I follow some. I had the opportunity to discuss some PhD theses on this and on the context of the Arab Spring, and they are very, very interesting. So authoritarian repression can be seen also as a form of displacement. If you see. Authoritarian repression can be seen also as a form of displacement of activism. So it's true that repression it has as a goal of distinguishing the activism and the opposition, and also any political possibility of dissidence, but many times the results are really unexpected. In any case, there are many forms that all the dictatorship adopt, and I don't need to mention all of them, but prohibition of gathering in public places is one of the first measures of any dictatorship, like is the first, just when it's part really of the implementation of the rules of the new regimes. But also private places are often under control with many different strategies. Of course, the construction of specific places where people that belong to the opposition are segregated, like for sure political prisons, concentration camps, and it was very common in Portugal, and of course in other regimes. And after we have this aspect of closure of the places and occupation of places by security forces, as in the case of the university campus. That is the one that I know better. But these forms of repression connected to the places can have unintended consequences and on the trajectories of activism, not just of the activists, but the trajectory of the activism in general. For instance, displacement of activism can provoke unexpected interactions. We know that interactions are the basis of mobilization, because interactions consolidate networks, and the networks are the basis of protest and any kind of social process. So networks, we mean simply contact among people, which are the basis of consolidating solidarities, identities, and many other different and also diffusion of knowledge, for instance, and practices, etc., etc. So this was very important. The simple fact that two places were closed and displaced, and activists was displaced from one place to another one, meant unexpected interaction among people that would have never interacted if not in this case. This is a very important excerpt from our friend and colleague Pedro Ramos Pinto, to publish this very nice book about urban movements during the Portuguese Revolution. And he mentioned that some women that were working at the Santa Maria Hospital, they were nurses, and they worked in this hospital, which was is still very close to the law faculty and to generally the university campus in Lisbon. And many times, particularly since the early 70s, the police, the security forces were occupying the campus, and the students that just escaped and were finding refuge refuge in the hospital. So they started interacting with these women and make, I don't know, maybe they even were offering some coffee, some kind of hospitality and protection. So what happened? These women were mostly connected to these movements in the Boavista, the occupation of the building in Boavista, this first occupation, squatting of a building, very important, which I mentioned before. We have to underline that the housing squatting was one of the main mobilization processes during the revolution. Was very, very important. So these women, when they needed to start this occupation, this squatting, and they needed to organize. So it's not as simple you go there and you start doing. This idea of spontaneity is important, but also we need to know how to manage a meeting, how to how to organize a squatting, how to divide the task during the squatting. Many things that need some democratic practices. And so they didn't know how to do this. So they went talking to the students that they knew before, because of the contingency of these two places, the hospital and the campus. And these are very fascinating example for me of how these things work. We have many others. Since 1973, the students started protesting in the poorest areas of Lisbon themselves. So, a process that started already in 1969. The first episode was in 1969. 1967, there were amazing floods in the city with a lot of people dying, and the medicine students, they just left the university campus. They went helping the people affected by the floods, and there discovered really the places around the city that about which they didn't have any knowledge about the poverty, about the conditions, etc., etc. So when the campuses started to be occupied very frequently in early 70s by police, of course, students started organizing protests and demonstrations and other activities outside the campus, which is absolutely what everybody else would have done. Not stopping protests, but go protesting somewhere else. And this just contributed to diffusion of practices of mobilizations, also claims. So politicization of places, like these neighborhoods where they were protesting, denouncing, for instance, the poor housing conditions of the people living there, or the areas, etc., etc., the unsafety. These areas are still now considered very highly symbols of the politicization occurring during the revolution, and of places that are frequently mentioned, for instance, by housing movements now in Lisbon in the context of gentrification, touristification, etc. So this displacement of students contributed to politicize other areas of the city. The political prisons are other cases of where affecting places. Of course, we have the creation of places where opposers were put for long periods, tense decades. But this also didn't contribute to demobilize people. People were in putting many different opposers from different groups, so together just contributed to reshape political identities. If we follow the trajectories of the activism, political trajectories of people in prisons, we see that really there are shifts between groups, like because of course there is an obliged interactions among different groups, and claims, revendication, ideals, and forms of understanding protest and politics. And this contributed to the creation of new political identities and new political figures. And after, when the prisons opened on the 26th of April 1974, and the activists were allowed to leave, we have a new generation form, really trained inside the prisons, that was ready to take over the rules of the emerging political regime, altogether also with the political exiles that were coming back. So revolutions can also be seen as a form of replacement. So if repression is a displacement, revolutions, any form of regime change, but for sure revolutions in a much stronger and radical way, a replacement of the political engagement. So for instance, trajectory of activists were affected, were important to re-politicizing the places during the revolution, and to open new opportunity for politics during the revolutionary process. And this also meant a sudden expansion of a multiplication of the places available for contention and for politics during the revolution. This was a really sudden opening of the places. Imagine one day from another, we have exactly this replacement of the political engagement. This is what I was mentioning before about this idea of the democratic practices, that they need training. So we cannot imagine that people just start knowing how to participate, participate in democracy, through democratic rules when the regimes fall down. So this is also a book that is a very important inspiration for me. It's A Democracy in the Making, which analyzes how democracy is implemented inside groups and in the yes. And I think that this is what's happening in this context of this transfer of practices and diffusion of political identities and form of mobilization and protest during the revolution, intensified by the revolution. Finally, activist trajectories across places and regimes can help us understanding the hybrid zones and the arenas overlapping. So help understanding how institutional and non-institutional political participation and activism and actions are much more overlapped than we usually think. Can also help us understanding the unexpected interaction among groups that we usually think that are very distant, and also to blur this boundary that we always think that exists very strong between who we consider is an activist and who we consider is not an activist. It can help to understand long-term impact of revolutionary moments, identity shifts, and also it can help us to dialogue with study carried out in other areas of the world, particularly in the global south, because we in the global north we are used to have a very specific idea about what we mean with politics, and I think that following the activist trajectories, we can understand hidden forms of politics that are not always the ones that we can observe through our northern lenses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I also have a PowerPoint presentation. Great. No problem. It's just for data. I'm going to speak about data at the end. I'm not going to overwhelm you with data. This is early warning. So you like data? Okay, great. Now let's see. I wanted to begin with to tell you, Marga has already said it, to tell you that what we're going to do is a comparative study between the Greece and Spanish case, mostly of transitional justice models and public opinion, recent public opinion about what we should do about conflicts of the past, those models of transitional justice that took place in each of these countries and that people think they should should take place today. This lecture is co-written with Magda Fitili. She will speak this afternoon about another topic. She will participate in the Q&A. The interest of this topic is that in spite of... Sorry, I also want to thank especially Luisa Martin Rojo that has invited me to participate. And of course, Rosa Luxemburgo Foundation, Amelia, and her colleagues for their effort. I was saying that in spite of the fact that transition in Spain and Greece have many common traits, and it's been said by for Spanish by Paloma Ligar, and in Greece also, that it is the end of the civil war in both countries. They come after civil wars and dictatorships. Nonetheless, the models of transitional justice are very different in both cases. I'm gonna first tell you what these models are about to put them into context, and then at the end I will present the data of the poll we did in the framework of a European project from 2020. You'll notice that they are already a bit out of date, because when we talk about political parties in this period in which are living, things change very swiftly. There are parties that don't exist anymore, others that nonetheless have emerged strongly since then. This is a warning. First, I'm going to put into context to tell you which are these two models and the factors behind each of these models. As you know, many of you here, in the case of Spain, they chose to look towards the future, to forget the past. It's been mentioned in former occasions in this meeting, the amnesty law of 1977 that has worked as a final point act that was followed by a period of strong silence, 20, 30 years, depending on since the 90s, maybe because of electoral reasons, they start to do references to civil war in the agenda of some political parties. In 2000, there is civil society initiatives, and then 30 years of silence if we look at the first historical memory acts. A long period of silence in 1977 that is broken in the mid-90s or early 2000s. Since then, we have a second historical memory act, Democratic Memory Act, now that although it has more advances with regards to the first, is still under the expectations of the special Paulo de Grave, Special Rapporteur of United Nations, that was mentioned yesterday. This period, since the break of the silence, has been characterized by a growing political polarization around the issues of historical memory. In the case of Greece, nonetheless, what happened in the transition and then is radically different. There was an immediate condemnation of the dictatorship. There was no reference to the civil war because it was easier to refer to a common enemy to all sides. That was the military junta, for reasons I will comment later. There were three processes, trials to the golpistas of 77, the torture, and the Polytechnic Revolution, about which Boglis has just spoken. After this first period in which the issue is judged, the responsibles of the dictatorship are judged, there is a period of political confrontation about what happens before the dictatorship. The topic is not forgotten. There is no silence. In the 80s until 89, there is a ecumenic Greek government in Spain, it was called, where there is an agreement between PASOK, Nea Demokratia, and Synaspismos, several two communist parties in Greece, and there they actually say that there was a reconciliation, and they chose oblivion, and even they decide to burn the police archives as a way of putting an end to that period. It is true that then it comes back during the economic crisis. This past re-emerges after 2012, after the rise of Syriza, but you see that trajectories in both countries are radically different. And now, again, Kostis, we have to refer to you because you've been the one that has said that this was the main difference of transitions in these countries related to transitional justice. We could go even extensively about the traits of these models beyond the political preferences of the political actors, dominant political actors during the transition. But to quote some rapidly, the nature of conflicts was very different in both countries. Civil wars, and Jesus Nieto has written about this topic here present. Civil wars have a difference of 10 years, but those are brutal. One is before the Cold War, and then the other after the Cold War. Another difference, and I think this is more relevant as far as the transition model and transitional justice is concerned, is the fact that in Greece, that civil war is the continuation of occupation, German occupation, and resistance against the occupation, to the point that, according to some polls, public opinion has a confusion about both periods that has a political usefulness. It can be politically manipulated. There is also a sector of population, Ilias Nikolakopoulos talks of the gray zone that was against the Nazi occupation, but also against the EAM, the communist government during the Civil War. And also this allows for a more ambivalent play in which you can be a victim in both conflicts. This strikes a difference with regards to the Spanish Civil War, where there was a clear dividing line between two sides. The other difference is the level of violence during the Civil War in Spain and Greece. In Spain, they talk of 500,000 killed, dead in the case of Greece, although it's a smaller country, some 50,000. This gives us an idea of the seriousness of violence. The post-war was quite different in both countries. In Spain, there is a 40 years long dictatorship, a dictatorship that was accompanied by some passive support. I mean, the so-called sociological Francoism. In the case of Greece, the dictatorship comes after a long period of new democracy. I have to refer to Ilias Nikolakopoulos, that is not here present, unfortunately. He speaks of sick democracy, kakektika. It was formally, although the formal democracy, although the left was prosecuted, but you cannot compare to 40 years of dictatorship. And the Greek dictatorship lasted only 7 years. It was very minoritarian. You cannot speak of something equivalent to sociological Francoism. It was just the colonels, a tiny group inside the army that felt mistreated by the generals. They weren't really supported in society. This made things more easy about making decisions in the Greek transition. The very nature of the transitions was very different. It's been mentioned yesterday. In Greece, it was a transition by collapse after the defeat in Cyprus. This also gave more room for political actions to the new elites that restored democracy in Greece, versus a case like the Spanish one, where the force relationship was more complicated. And also the social pressure in both cases was different. In Greece's case, there was an individual initiative for the judicial prosecution, legal prosecution of the responsible of dictatorship and torture. And in the case of Spain, because of the factors I have summarized briefly, there was no such initiative from society that would get to the point to a judiciary action by political powers of judiciary powers in order to judge perpetrators. This has happened afterwards. It happened, but not with the same support as in Greece. If we look at data about what people think today about what should have been done at that point, or what should we do now about human rights abuses during that period, both in Greece and Spain, civil war and dictatorship, and in Greece also the period of the cachectic democracy. We would expect to have more polarization of opinion in the Spanish case, precisely because there has been no attempt of reconciliation that has been successful. Of course, reconciliation can never be successful, neither in the case of Greece. The past is always expected to come back, but the path is very different in both cases. In 1989, in Greece, there is an agreement among the majority of political parties to put an end to the past, while in Spain that attempt is very recent and has been inconclusive. If it will ever be concluded, I'm going to show you, as I said, some data that come out of a poll from 2020, in which, among many other things, I have selected some data. We would ask, both in Spain and Greece, whether they think that today reconciliation was necessary. And also, we would ask what people understood as reconciliation. This is quite interesting because the polls, and I agree with this, although I work a lot with polls and they are interesting, but they don't tell us anything. We should go into a more detailed analysis, crossing variables, in order to see what people mean by a term in different countries. Reconciliation can mean very different things, both in Spain and Greece, and we're going to say it. But for the time now, is it necessary reconciliation today? If you look at the two columns to the left, corresponds to Greece, the second to Spain, and there you compare people that feels sympathy for the sides in civil wars. To the left, to the right afterwards, for the Republicans and Nationals in the Spanish case. Third and fourth bar or column are those that feel sympathy for both or none of the sides. I recommend you to focus on the first two columns. To begin with, we see that in Greece there is much more level of agreement about the need of reconciliation today than in Spain. This goes against the expectations because there was already in '89 an attempt with the agreement of the different parties from the right to the two communist parties and also Socialist Party, the PASOK, of reconciliation that didn't took place in Spain, but you see levels of support of some of 90% of support to this option. In the Spanish case, there is not only more difference among parties, but they feel more sympathy for the Republican side, those that say that today we need a reconciliation. That is not paid attention in Spain. If we go to the right, to the groups of columns to the right that compare Greece and Spain, there we have divided answers according to the electoral preference in the two last elections. They refer of July 19 and 19 also, and November 19 in Greece. It's out of date. You see Ciudadanos, a party that doesn't exist. Also, relevant parties in Greece aren't there. So what we see there, it offers information of what those people think when they talk about reconciliation. Those who voted KKE, the Communist Party in Greece, are those more in disagreement about the fact that a reconciliation is needed, the contrary to the expectation in Spain. The sympathizers of the Republican side are those who consider that today it is necessary. Out of this, I would conclude that what they understand in Greece as reconciliation is what happened in '89, from which the KKE has detached himself from this agreement. The KKE voters are saying we don't want that. Now we don't want to forget. On the contrary, what they say in Spain, we want this to be talk about. We want the justice for the victims. So we see different meanings of reconciliation in one country and the other. But another thing that strikes our attention, there are more difference between citizens in Spain than in Greece. In Greece, somehow, although voters of KKE think differently, if we look at the first graph and the second, there is more homogeneity of opinion, while in Spain you see that the voters of Podemos and then the Socialist Party are those that want more reconciliation today versus the voters of Vox and Popular Party. While in Greece there is less difference among parties. And just to conclude, I go to another chart where you can see the answers to what reconciliation means. And here there were 4 options. Blue means pardon among parties, among sides, possible meaning of reconciliation, a mutual pardon. In orange, it was the option of forgetting the past and looking forward. The option Spanish option during the transition. The gray color was about reparation of those that have suffered injustice in the past, and the yellow option means that reconciliation amounts to a commitment to dialogue among different parties. What we see here is that, generally speaking, the more frequent answer, I don't mean majority, that more half than half of the population, the most frequent one is forgetting and looking ahead. the orange one, if you see it, both in Spain and Greece. Again, like we saw in the former case, there are much more differences inside the Spanish public opinion than in Greece's. If you look at the first group of bars, the division according to sympathies and civil wars, you see that those of Spain, it's very different response by those sympathizers with the Republicans that opt for oblivion as a symbol of reconciliation, much less than the others. That is expected. It doesn't surprise us. Only 17% of those sympathizers with Republicans equate reconciliation with oblivion. In Greece's case, you see that sympathizers of the left also they equate reconciliation and oblivion less, but with less remarkable difference with the rest of the population. And if we go to the third and fourth group of graphs, what we see there again is the order answers according to the vote preference in last elections. We see that in Spain there is more heterogeneity in answers than in Greece's case. A very easy example, if you look at reconciliation equates forgetting the past. The most extreme cases are, of course, those voters of Podemos that opt for that answer, 25%, versus Vox voters that opted with 61%. You see that society is divided for and against oblivion. In the Greece's case, that difference is confirmed if we compare voters with Communist Party. The KKE opt for oblivion in a 30%, something more than in Spain, and the difference with Nea Democratia is somewhat less, because it's 57% equate reconciliation and oblivion. So, generally speaking, the left, of course, does wants oblivion in a lesser degree than the right, but those who opt for that option are very different in Spain and Greece. These charts show that in Spain there is more work to be done according to the transitional justice models that have been followed in each of country. That doesn't mean that the past is not coming back. In Greece, the past has come back. It can be politicized. It can be used with electoral intentions. I think we should reflect about this. The fact that the past comes back in Spain has a lot to do with the fact that the Socialist Party was losing the majority. From the party point of view, of course, civil society has had an important role, but the assumption by the parties of that discourse had to do with different dynamics, because we are seeing that Vox in Spain is using the past, very vocal about the past. It's not the former attitude of the right about forgetting. Vox wants to speak about the past. They are using it politically. If we had some time for discussion, I would like to discuss about maybe the comrades from Greece can comment how far the rise of the far right is also introducing a different discourse about Nea Democratias, like in Spain. Vox is introducing different with regards to the Popular Party. I think that's also interesting to reflect about what the younger people are thinking about these transitional justice models. I haven't brought data about that, but we've done a poll last year, and data are a bit discouraging. The younger people are losing interest about the past. They are more concerned about the present, about the younger people of other period, not just about older generations. I think it's interesting to comment, to reflect about these comparisons among countries, because many times we look for similitudes where there is no such similitude, and sometimes the same terms means very different things. So for the detractors of polls, I'm gonna defend them, because in this case they have been useful in order to see the trajectories of those meanings, but still more qualitative analysis and work are needed to shed light on this. That's all on my part. Magda has all rights to counter me. We've said that already. So I don't know whether you want to add something now, then in the Q&A. So thanks a lot.